Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. This is the 8th webinar in our self-build series, a series designed to give you the information and knowledge to get started on your self-build journey. As usual, it will be recorded and uploaded to YouTube in the next couple of days. Your mics and cameras will be off. If you can just keep them off, please. And you can ask any questions in the Q&A, which we'll go through at the end. We'll leave a bit of time afterwards to go through any questions that you might have. So I'm joined by Alasdair Stephen, which some of you might have seen before at our webinars. He's a managing director at HebHomes, and we're joined by Ronan Carroll of Daly and Carroll Architects, aka DACA. Hello, gentlemen. Thanks for joining us.
Good afternoon.
Ronan set up DACA a few years ago with his business partner Eamon. They're based in Dublin, and they focus on residential architecture, specialising in new build, renovation and extension to existing properties. So DACA are set up as our partners in Ireland, and they can act as your agent for your project. We actually had a very successful exhibition in Dublin a few weekends ago, and Ronan and Eamon kindly joined us at the stand. You might have actually, some people on this call, we might have met there, so nice to see you again and thanks for joining. So today we're talking specifically about building in Ireland. So I'm going to leave you with Alasdair and Ronan for now, and I'll rejoin at the end of the webinar to take any questions and to sum things up. So you can take it away, guys.
Hello everyone, as Fraser says, I'm Alasdair Stephen, and I'll tell you a wee story to begin with about how HebHomes and also our sister company Daly has started, and it does involve Ireland. I'm your typical Glaswegian in that I've got family from the Isle of Skye, family from the Highlands, and my pal at university is another typical Glaswegian in that he had a mother from Donegal, from Gweedore in the north of Ireland. So when we were in second year, we decided to do a project where we looked at the housing situations in Skye and the housing situation over in Donegal and to compare the two. So this was looking at the economics and the politics and also the architecture of the two areas and two Gaelic-speaking areas. And we found similarities, but we also found quite a few differences. Now, when we went to Skye, first of all, what we discovered was a community that was in decline. There was a lot of the older buildings, the white houses were dilapidated, and people were leaving. It was quite sad in many ways because of that. That's where my mother was from. That's where she grew up partially. And then we went over to Donegal, and what we found there was a community that was thriving. People were returning, houses were being built, the pubs were very busy, and but we felt the quality of the architecture wasn't appropriate to beautiful landscapes. This was back in the early 90s. Even then, there was inappropriate buildings being built in that beautiful landscape. So out of that, we made a film. We wrote wrote dissertations, but we also designed a building, which was the beginning of my business, which was Daly. So that was a house based on the longhouse form, which was common to Northern Europe. So that's the longhouse form would have been seen in Ireland. It would have certainly been seen in Scotland in the form of the Black House and across Northern Europe. And this long, narrow building slotted into the landscape quite easily. It was the form which suited a landscape where there's very rarely a flat bit of ground. And it just looked good. And what we wanted to do was to replace what was being built, which in Scotland was timber frame kit houses, which were inappropriate designs. And in Ireland, there was a lot of houses based on Bungalow Bliss, which was a book that was brought out, I believe, in the 1960s. And both of these housing types, the kit house in Scotland and the houses that were built in Ireland, were transformational because people had been living in below tolerable standard houses. But we saw that if we could use modern technology, but also look back to the old designs, to the old longhouse forms, we could maybe come up with a typology where the thread of architecture had not been broken. We're trying to reimagine if the older housing forms have been developed into modern buildings, that how might they look, how might they be built. So that was the basis of the business that myself and my twin Neil set up, called Daly. That's a Gaelic word some of you may recognise, which doesn't have a direct English translation, but it sort of means cultural inheritance, cultural heritage. But there's a lot more to it than that. So we set up Dulachas Building Design, now called Dulachas Architects, and we were designing buildings that were based on our own vernacular, our own heritage, but we were upgrading them, modernising them for today. They became quite successful, so much so that people were asking for the same design over and over again. So about 20 years ago, we set up HebHomes, or Hebridean Contemporary Homes, as it was called then. And that was taking these designs that we developed through our architecture practice and effectively turning them into kits. They make them modular, so you could choose the same design over and over again. And we would supply in a kit form, a high quality kit, and we would make it as easy as possible for these to be purchased and then we would erect them, and then they'd be completed by the local contractor. So one of the things that I didn't fully understand was that the kit was not I suppose it wasn't the construction type that was common in Ireland. It was mainly block, even though some of the plans from Bungalow Bliss, that book, were very similar to the kit houses that were built in Scotland. And the way they were built wasn't common. So Ronan, I don't know if you want to maybe add a wee bit about the difference between the heritage of construction in Scotland and the way it's progressed in Ireland up until recently.
Yeah, well, I suppose, like I say, I suppose the single biggest in terms of rural domestic architecture in Ireland, Bungalow Bliss probably had the single biggest impact. I think everyone probably who lives in Ireland would be familiar with the Bungalow Bliss house and its ubiquity around the countryside. And it made house building plausible, I guess, for a lot of people where it wouldn't have necessarily been. But I think in most cases, the form of them, is not particularly suitable to the landscape, and they rarely were based on the local landscape. They were positioned, according to the road and etc. And orientation wasn't really a consideration, and the orientation rooms, etc. So they leave a lot to be desired, So, but I think, as you suggest, the older vernacular style of buildings sit much better in the landscape. And in fact, when we get on to in the planning authorities, all of the local county councils have design guides, rural design guides, that give advice on rural design, and it fits very comfortably within the sort of HebHomes concept, So I think that's something definitely worth considering. So.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I might add is that a few years ago I was invited onto a Radio Scotland programme because there was an exhibition about Bungalow Bliss in Glasgow. It's entitled Bungalow Bliss or Bungalow Blitz. And I didn't realise that the man who wrote the book, Jack Fitzsimmons, was going to be a guest. And I was brought on as a Scottish architect, I suppose, to criticise his designs, which I wasn't willing to do. Because the point I made was that, as I mentioned previously, was that these houses were transformational. And it's the same in Scotland. The kit house, the timber frame kit house, was transformational for people because they lived in houses that, in many cases, were below tolerable standard buildings. I remember back in the 1990s, there were still people living in thatched cottages in the Highlands of Scotland with no running water, no toilets, tended to be older people. And likewise, you would have a similar situation in Ireland. So when these new building typographies came in, it was transformational. But what I did say in the radio programme was that in Ireland, in particular, when it gained its independence, it used, language, it used sports, music, dance, religion, in order to, distinguish itself culturally from England. I'm not going to say Britain, I'm going to say England. But architecture is a very, very important part of culture. When you cross the border into Scotland, you realise you're in a stone country. The buildings do look different from in Scotland than they do in England. And there's a long history that goes back and explanations as to why it's quite different. And that is the same in Ireland to a degree. And I think, as we do build in our beautiful rural landscapes that are very similar in the west of Scotland as the west of Ireland, we've got a responsibility to those landscapes. And we should also take some pride in our architectural heritage. So what I'll do is I'll show you some examples of some of the buildings which HebHomes have built over the years, and you'll also see similarities in the landscape. Some of these you'll think you're in Ireland. So here's the first one. So you'll see on the right hand side up here, that's a little traditional white cottage, that's common in the Highlands. And then here on the left, that's a longhouse, a very simple HebHomes. Now, that one is built with block and render with a slate roof. A few years ago, that is just about all you could build in Scotland because the planners insisted upon it. But nowadays, the planners, especially in the Highlands, but generally across Scotland, will let you use all sorts of different materials because what they realise is what's important when you're building in a rural landscape is the form, it's the proportion of the roof to the wall. It doesn't matter really what the windows are like or what the material finish is, as long as the form fits well within landscape. We had quite a lot of battles over the years, and I think there's Ronan, I think there's quite a few battles still to be had in Ireland when it comes to material finishes.
I think there will be, yeah. But I think its situation's improving, but it is sometimes a sort of a reflex almost of planners to, just to insist that it's slate roof and render walls, to sit better into the landscape. But I think there's definitely scope to convince them otherwise.
So here's an example. This is one of our larger houses, TH302. And what you can see here is it's black Siberian larch, which is it's been oil black, a black profile metal roof with hidden gutters. So it's a very simple form. This particular design is quite a large house, but the front living wing here hides the larger bedroom wing in elevation. So the building, when you're viewing it from the road, does not look as large as it actually is. But that's an example of a building which almost disappears into the landscape. When you do a building in a dark colour like black, then it effectively disappears into the shadows. And when you have the roof the same colour as the walls, then it becomes an object in the landscape. And it is quite effective. And it means you get very sharp, as long as you get very sharp detailing, which is important. One of the things that, because we're an architect-led house company, is we can do very sharp detailing you would expect from an architect, rather than just bog standard stuff. This is a more traditional White House design. So we've got 5 ranges. One of them is the White House range. So even though these are not designs which historically were part of the design lexicon of the Highlands of Scotland, they're an imported farmhouse style building. They are seen as being very traditional within the landscapes of most of Scotland now. And in Ireland as well, buildings like this will be fairly common, 1.5 storey with the dormers. The reason that we've introduced this is because for these buildings, it's all about proportion. And there's a lot of house companies that try and copy these, but they get the proportion all wrong, the wall to roof relationship. And so the front elevation is very symmetrical, and it's within the extension at the side that you have the large windows where you can capture the views. Again, this is a very simple longhouse form, but this is clad in Siberian larch with a slate roof, and it just slots into the landscape quite easily. And yeah, this is on the Isle of Skye, but this could be the west coast of Ireland. But what we find here is that we don't have any problems at all getting plan permission for these type of houses through most of Scotland now. It's if a house can be built, a HebHomes can be built, and the planners generally are delighted to see our designs being presented to them, just because they're used to very inappropriate designs being presented to them from kit house brochures. It'd be the equivalent of turning up with Bungalow Bliss in 2025 and seeing the reaction you get from a planner. They're not particularly happy. But as Ronan says, there will be more complex issues in Ireland, but by teaming up with Ronan and DACA, we can overcome these, and we offer flexibility in the design, so we can change the fenestration material finishes in order to get planning. So that's another example of the traditional White House I just mentioned, quite a large house built in Shetland. So we're going to move on to why you would choose a HebHomes in Ireland. Now, I'll go through some of these quickly, and then I'll let Ronan take over. So, as I mentioned previously, these are kit homes. So the benefit of a kit home, a modular home, we build them in 2 forms, which is SIP or CPS, but they're very high quality, extremely low U values. So you don't have to worry about high heating bills. They will go up extremely quickly. We'll get our kits up in a few days. As I've been talking about over the past few minutes, they are very simple forms and they fit into the landscape very nicely. So it tends to be we overcome most of the problems with planning. There will be challenges in Ireland, but compared to most designs that are presented, we think they will get planning relatively easily, especially with the input of a local architect or the likes of DACA. It's a very cost-effective way of building because these are pre-designed architect-designed houses. You're not having to pay an architect for the design fees, and they're pre-engineered, so there's savings there. But also there's speed because they're pre-designed. You're not going through a long process of design. We will release the drawings. You can choose the drawings. You can go through pre-planning just by downloading drawings from our website at no cost, getting that pre-planning approval. And then there's a fee of €1,100 to get the full set of planning drawings of the house itself released for the planning application. We do offer customization. We offer flexibility. There's information on our website about that. So even if there's a house that doesn't quite suit your brief or doesn't quite suit your particular plot, you work with us and we'll make those changes for you. And as I mentioned, there may be requirements for change from the local planning authority as well, and we will try and incorporate that to give you the maximum chance of getting planning. And then there's the difference between SIP and CPS. Now in Ireland, we'll mainly work in SIP. We use an Irish company called SIP Energy in Athenry to fabricate the SIP panels for us, so we don't have any problems with Brexit. But we can also import the CPS, the closed panel system, which is an advanced timber frame. So that means that the insulation is fitted in the factory, it's closed in the factory, the membranes are fitted in the factory, the internal wall battens are fitted in the factory. So we will erect that by our improved installers within like 3 or 4 days for a typical house. And then from that stage, it's very simple to finish off from that point. So any local contractor would find that relatively easy. So Ronan, if you want to compare that system to what's normally used in Ireland at the moment.
Yeah, well, I guess still the most traditional form of construction in Ireland is block built. Typically a cavity wall construction. Although there are, more recently, insulated formwork and other methodologies coming into the system. But with a block built cavity wall construction, there is a lot of risk there and potential for poor workmanship, etc. And it can be fine if done well, obviously, but the benefit in getting something like this, which is a factory manufactured precision kit that's delivered and assembled on site, as you say, over the course of a couple of days, there's huge benefits there and takes a huge amount of the risk out of the process, I suppose. And ourselves as architects would be a lot of the elements that we would be concerned with oversight on site, for jobs typically, issues with insulation, installation and cavity walls and cold bridging and poorly fitted installation, etc. So huge benefits there. And then obviously, it sort of lends itself to people looking to do self-builds or direct labour work. You get your house and walls and roof and all erected and weather tight over the course of a week. And then, you can, in terms of internal finishes and various trades that are required to do that, it's much more manageable, I think, for people not used to building. So yeah, I think there's huge benefits there. Block work, I guess we did touch on external render. It's still sort of advised. There are other methods of lightweight render boards, etc., but it's probably advisable to build an external leaf if looking to go with a render finish. So you still have some element of block work there, but it's sort of sacrificial. It's not a structural element of the building, so it's less critical. And obviously people will be familiar with issues with mica, etc., up in Donegal in particular, and various other problems that have hit the construction industry and masonry and block material in particular. So taking that out of the equation is going to be a huge advantage to people.
Yeah, I think what we've noticed is when people move from their older houses into a new house, it's completely transformational. I mean, especially if someone lives in an older stone building. We've done a number of houses for farmers, and you go and visit them, and the farmer's wife, and they've got this stove on, they've got the fires on in the middle of the summer, even if it's a hot day outside. They're just used to being in a cold stone building. So these houses, not only are they good bits of architecture, but they're so warm, and you've got a constant environment internally, whether it's the summer or winter. You just set the thermostat for the environment that you want, and you'll enjoy it all year round because they're so solid and so strong. And you'll see in the image there a stove that's been lit up for the photographer. You really don't need a stove. Most of our clients want stoves, but they're really pieces of furniture. If you live in a part of the country where there's electricity cuts, then it's a good idea to have a stove if you're going for a few days without electricity, if that's common. But really, it's just a piece of furniture that looks good. But they are amazingly warm, but also they're free of drafts. They're incredibly airtight, and they're unlike a lot of the earlier timber frame buildings. I mean, there's big house builders in the UK still build with 100mm timber frame. They just try and get away with it. And these houses will shake and shudder, and you'll get drafts coming through in their cold roofs. And the houses that we do are incredibly strong, incredibly solid. So the SIP is very, very strong in itself. The CPS, the wall is actually this timber frame construction wall is 235 deep. If you've got the blockout relief on it as well, the internal finish is going to be closer to 325, 350mm. So it's a very, very thick wall that does not move. So it's quite transformational. It's great. Many of our clients really enjoy being in our houses, and the Atlantic storms are rolling in, and they're just viewing the storm. They're not hearing it. They're not feeling it. They're just viewing it, and it makes staying in one of these houses quite an exhilarating experience because you're completely protected from the storm. And that really is what traditional architecture was all about. I mean, the way the older buildings were designed. If you look at in the Western Isles, for example, all the old black houses were not designed against rain. I mean, obviously they had to keep the rain out, but they were primarily designed against the Atlantic storm and protection from that. So with modern building technologies, you don't have to have the same form, the same low roof and shapes, but what you do want is you want that strength. And all of our houses, apart from the structure themselves being strong, are engineered for the particular site. So if your site is in a remote part of the west of Ireland, likewise up in Shetland, we will make sure that it's engineered for the strongest possible storms that are rolling in. Like I know you had one 3 or 4 weeks ago that was pretty extreme, but you wouldn't feel it in one of our houses because they're so warm. I mean, one thing that I will point out is that with the SIP, because we fabricate in Ireland, it's easy to get mortgages. With the CPS, because we fabricate in Scotland and the UK and we import it in, there might be more challenges getting a mortgage on that. We will find a resolution and make sure that we update that information on the website. But for the moment, the SIP is probably the easiest. We do have this situation in the UK as well, and you may come across it yourself, whether you're using a kit that's fabricated in Ireland or the UK. When you speak to someone from a lender, a lot of the time they have got no experience of lending on self-builds, and they don't really understand the different forms of construction. And if you speak to the wrong person, they're likely to tell you that, well, we don't give mortgages on new build houses or on modular houses. We do have an information website which indicates all the lenders that do give mortgages, but you just have to speak to the right person. If you do come across any problems, you can speak to us and we'll get it sorted for you, or we'll do our best. But yeah, it's something that happens over in the UK. You phone up someone in a high street bank and they're used to lending on purchases in the existing property market, and they literally don't have a clue about lending on people building their own homes. So I think the last point on this is track record in Ireland. We've only just launched a standalone website in Ireland. Now, the way that works is that it's very similar to our UK website or Scottish website at the moment, but it's been updated for the Irish situation. But it will be becoming more and more divergent as we go along and we get more and more projects completed in Ireland. We've just had one completed in County Mayo. There's a wee bit of landscaping going on at the moment, but I think the owner, he's absolutely delighted with it. I think he will make that available for viewing at some point, maybe in the spring or summer. But we've got several projects which are on the drawing board, so to speak, or inside the computer, and they'll be going on site over the next few months. And yeah, we're really excited about getting more and more houses built in Ireland because we think it'll be a great product and they will look fantastic in an website. And I'm going to pass on to Ronan here because we're getting into the Irish planning system that he's an expert on. So on you go, Ronan.
Okay, thanks, Alasdair. I suppose just in the planning process, right? Just an overview of the Irish planning system. I suppose without getting into too much detail, probably a lot of people here will be familiar to some extent with the planning process. So planning permission is administered by each of the individual counties on a county by county basis. And all of the counties have their own county development plan, which sets out the development criteria, etc., for their counties. I suppose just in terms of timelines, before we get into the specific requirements, so your typical planning application timeline is 8 weeks. So you submit a planning application, there's 8 weeks to a decision. At that stage, you'll get a decision. Hopefully it's a notification to grant. Then there's a 4-week period, appeals period, where someone can make an objection if they've previously lodged a submission. And then if there's no further objection after that 4 weeks, you'd get your final grant after 12 weeks. So you're 12 weeks from start to finish. That's assuming no further information request or other issue arises. In terms of the planning application, and so as I said, each county has its own development plan. The key item, I guess, for people on this call and people prospective HebHomes clients, customers, I mean, will be local needs requirement, right? So there's quite restrictive local needs requirements in all of the various counties, which basically seeks to limit new houses, new rural houses to people who have a demand, a need to live in the area. And that might be for reasons such as farming or agriculture, or if they're living and working locally or from the area. But even some of those things alone are not necessarily sufficient. Within each of the counties, I suppose there's no real overall way to cover this. Within each of the counties, then they subsequently divide into different areas. So you have different designations, such as areas of high scenic beauty, you know, whereby development is extremely restricted. And then you have other areas like under strong urban influence. This is some of the terminology that they use. So again, it's restricted, but you have other areas which are designated structurally weak, or areas that they are seeking to sort of reinforce, maybe with new population, etc., where road houses will be looked upon much more favourably. But in essence, that's the biggest challenge people are going to have, justifying their local needs requirement. So, you know, if that's something people want to speak to us about, we can certainly help you through that and sort of guide people in terms of the level of information that they might require to do that. I suppose one of the things that's potential workaround is to look for a site that has an existing building on the site. In certain cases, that can sort of circumvent the requirement for local needs. Would sort of just caution that it's not necessarily straightforward. There's quite a lot of complexity and nuance in the way that various councils handle existing properties. Also the definition of what is a dwelling, if a house, if it's an old ruin that doesn't have a roof or windows, then they'll deem it no longer to be functioning as a dwelling. Therefore, it doesn't get you around the requirement for a new dwelling. I suppose in some ways the optimum scenario may be that rather than having an old vernacular building that the planning department might want you to retain, that you have something that's of limited architectural significance, let's say, you know, something from maybe from the 60s and 70s that's in poor condition, that you can make a justification around demolishing and rebuilding with a new house. And that's something that we have done before. With the current cost of construction for renovation and complexity around renovation, and sometimes the compromised nature of what you're left with by the time you do a deep retrofit on some dwellings, it can be possible to make a justification around replacing with a new high performing house such as the HebHomes, you know. So that's one route. But I suppose in general what we'd say to people is, you know, there is a lot of complexity and variation there between the various different councils and various parts of individual counties that need to be looked at on a case by case basis. So that's the planning. I suppose in terms of clients, if they want to use our services for planning, that's something we're happy to do, and something that we're proposing, I suppose, as part of our partnership with Les and HebHome, so we can prepare planning application. All of the designs and house types, etc., obviously will come from HebHomes, and that'll be something that you will liaise with Alasdair and his team on in terms of selection or making modifications. But we typically sort of sit in the middle of that process there as well, in terms of just getting the house to where you guys need it to be, and then we would be responsible for coordinating all of the site specific aspects of that. Initially, what we typically do, we would have we break that into stage sort of 1A and 1B. So we'd have a stage 1A whereby we sort of liaise with yourselves around all the information that are required for the planning application, looking at your local needs, etc., and most likely preparing a submission for a pre-planning consultation with the local planning department to just assess the viability, I suppose, of the proposed project. It's not something we would typically do for domestic extensions, etc., because they're much less contentious, but it is worthwhile doing for one-off houses. So we can do that. We send it into the planning department, and you get some feedback from them. Can be a little bit of a frustrating process because it's sort of non-binding, and they sometimes don't necessarily follow through on that when you submit a planning application, but it does give you an indication or a steer as to how your application will be received. So that would be our sort of stage 1A. Stage 1B then, assuming that you get a positive or at least a neutral response to that initial stage, you would proceed to prepare a full planning application, and we would assist with existing our surveys and site drawings, including access, sight lines on access, and drainage drawings, etc. So wastewater disposal, typically a septic tank, percolation area, all that sort of stuff. So everything that you need, and put together the planning application for submission. And then obviously sitting within that would be the drawings of the house themselves, which are coming from HebHomes. And depending on the location, etc., depending on the finishes proposed, to put a justification around that into the planning department to try and head off, I suppose, that condition that might come back that wants it to be render and slate roof, and hope that doesn't happen. So
yeah, I think we had one recently, Ronan, where the planners insisted that it was rendered on slate roof, and they also wanted wee windows to look like a cottage. But you went through some negotiation and eventually got approval.
Yeah, they wanted to sort of revise the fenestration, i.e. the windows, to a sort of with a vertical emphasis and all this sort of stuff, So we did in the end have to concede on the render and slate roof, but managed to make a justification around retaining the sort of large contemporary windows, etc., which the client in particular was very determined to hang on to. In that case, they sort of made a justification that they seen it as part of a small flock-on of buildings in Donegal, and that was their justification. Otherwise, we could quite easily have gone back with a justification, particularly around corrugated roofs, which are commonplace, but also maybe the timber cladding. But there was a sense that they had made that justification, that even if you show me lots of examples in the neighborhood where you have similar finishes, those houses don't exist within this particular stock-on, so there was an element of concession on that one. But we'd hope as time goes on that it'll become more commonplace that those sort of materials, I mean, it's not uncommon to see in Donegal and Galway and Mayo and etc., black large timber cladding, corrugated roofs, zinc roofs, standing seam, all these sort of finishes, and contemporary sort of rural dwellings. So we can point to those sort of examples as justification, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, you really want to go for what you want initially. If you're getting a lot of pushback from the planners, then your architect like Ronan will try and deal with it. But if you're in a landscape with beautiful views looking over lochs and mountains and glens, you don't want to be viewing it through a small window with astragals. You want to enjoy it through, triple glazed wall to ceiling glazing, which nowadays the technology is so advanced that there's no problem having that at all. So the planners need to be pushed against, but sometimes if you want to get a house built, you do have to compromise, but you still want a good bit of architecture. So move on to detailed design and building regulations. So what HebHomes are going to do, if you're using your own local architect, we have to understand this, that HebHomes are doing all the drawings of the building for planning of the building itself above the ground. And we're also doing all the detailed drawings at the building regulation stage and all the engineering drawings above the ground. And we'll provide that. So it's important that your agent understands the schedule of services that they're offering, that there's no duplication. But you do need to have an agent in Ireland that takes on some of the responsibilities of getting it through the building regulation stage. So, Ronan, if you want to describe in a bit more detail what that would be.
Yeah, so typically, as Alasdair was saying, all of the house and the construction, etc., and even internal elements are covered within the HebHomes package. So, in terms of what we would offer as a local agent, and in conjunction with a local structural engineer, which would be key there in terms of designing the foundations and the ground floor slab, be it a raft or rising wall or whatever that might end up being, depending on the site conditions. And ensuring that's, I suppose, that's obviously a critical element. And the junction, the interface between your house, your base of your walls, and your slab, and insulation and damp proofing continuity at those points are kind of critical. That taken together with all of the remaining site works, whatever they might be in terms of drainage and waste disposal, etc. And then in terms of internal finishes, all of that is typically outlined in the HebHomes package, but that's something that we would cover as well, I suppose, and just ensure the execution of all them is done in accordance with the requirements and building regulations, etc., for electrical, full electrical installation, obviously signed off, recce certs and all that, and then plumbing, typically using heat pump, typically underfloor heating at ground floor level, and a ventilation system, be it a mechanical heat recovery, preferably, or a DCV ventilation system, so all those elements, I suppose, we would oversee and ultimately ensure sign off and compliance at the end.
Yeah, so the difference is we'll go into this in the next slide, but in Scotland, what would happen is that we would submit to the council for building warrant approval, and there's an officer within the council who will check all the drawings to make sure it complies with all the building regulations. In Ireland, it's slightly different, so we can discuss that in the next slide. So this is where it becomes quite different in Ireland than it is from the south of Ireland, than it is from Scotland. So if you want to describe, Ronan, how you get from getting your planning approval, us doing the technical drawings, to actually getting it on site and what has to happen.
Yeah. So sorry, as you were saying, in Scotland you have a building warrant approval scenario, so you have to provide all the drawings for sign off essentially prior to commencing on site, as I understand it.
Yeah.
In Ireland, it's more of I suppose traditionally it was always a self-certification process, so there was no obligation really to demonstrate to anyone that you were building in compliance with the building regulations, other than whoever was providing sign off at the end. That's still essentially the way it is in Ireland, I guess, but the BCAR, Building Control Amendment regulations that were introduced in 2014, introduced another actor into that, I suppose, in terms of the assigned certifier who's responsible for oversight of all of the elements of the building construction and inspection and sign off. And the commencement notice, which you typically submit upon commencement of a project following planning application. If you're going down through a BCAR route, which is, I suppose, the route that is currently advised by the RAI and other professional bodies, you require an independent appointment of an assigned certifier. they will submit the commencement notice with what's called with documentation. So they will provide drawings and specifications to demonstrate compliance with the building regulations, which will be provided by the architect and or HebHomes in that instance. And ultimately, there's a completion certificate issued upon completion of the building. So it just provides more paperwork, I suppose, and provides more comfort for homeowners in terms of a paper trail of all of the elements that are done in there, although inspections are probably still not common on one-off rural dwellings, but not unknown either. There is an opt-out process for the BCAR assigned certifier role that's available to one-off dwellings and extensions, which is something that can be done, which would omit that role of the assigned certifier and that sort of additional documentation that will be provided. If that's the case, there's a sort of more straightforward commencement notice, which is just notification to the local building authority that the project is about to commence. Apologies. But that's a decision, I suppose, for a client to make, depending on the job, and we can liaise with people in terms of which route they want to go in that sense.
I suppose, Ronan, the big question a lot of people ask is the main contractor. So what HebHomes provide is we'll supply the kit, we'll erect it to window weather tight, but a contractor's required to prepare the site, put in the foundations, the slab, and that normally takes about a month before we arrive at HebHomes. And then after we leave, a main contractor is required to finish it off, or it could be individual subcontractors' trades to complete it. So that appears to be a bit of a challenge because, as I understand it, a lot of your skilled tradesmen left in the last crash in 2008 and haven't come back. So there's a bit of a shortage.
Yeah, it can be difficult, I think, but I think there's still typically no, I was going to say there's no great challenge in finding contractors. There actually is, but you will typically find contractors, and they in turn will find their relevant subcontractors, although it is an issue, particularly in relation to inflation, and particularly inflation cost of some of the subcontractor elements because they're so in demand. But yeah, we would be confident typically in finding contractors, in various areas that will be interested in doing this. I suppose the preference in some ways, particularly if a client is, not sort of familiar with the construction industry, is that you would have a single point of responsibility. You would have a main contractor who would take in the erection of the house and the installation of windows, etc., as part of that project. So they prepare all the groundworks, the rising walls, foundations, slab. Then the house is erected as one small part of that, and then it's all of the remaining finishing out after that. And it means that they have a sort of single point of responsibility, and there's sort of finger pointing. But it's also possible that you'd have someone just doing the groundworks and then, someone else coming in to do the finishing off, which is a sort of viable route, or other people might want to go down direct labour routes. I think for people looking to do a direct labour, whether, finding their own subcontractors to do all of the fit out elements, that will be a challenge in terms of what you mentioned, the scarcity of subcontractors. And these people are so in demand that it would be difficult for members of Joe Public, I think, to get them there on time and when they're supposed to be there, when they'll have other people shouting at them who might be repeat clients, etc. So
yeah, well, I think you said there, Ronan, the important thing is that if you've got an agent, now it could be DACA or it could be a local architect, but you've got someone who's effectively the lead consultant. So they're leading the process all the way through, and then they can be responsible for the tender process if required, and they can also be the agent that organises the main contractor. Having a main contractor who becomes the project manager when it's on site, I think that's the easiest way of doing it, rather than trying to organise trades yourself. Organising trades, if you're within industry, if you get contacts, can save you quite a lot of money. But if you're not within the industry and you don't have any contacts, it's probably quite a stressful way of doing it. I know someone just asked there about the foundations. The foundations, we provide all the information, and basically our houses are built off a slab, but the foundations themselves are very site specific. They have to be There has to be a ground investigation done, and an engineer has to design them. Now, will generally just be straightforward strip foundations, but the depth of those foundations will come down to the particular ground conditions that are on the site. So it's important that that's done locally. There's an engineer that does that, but that will be up to your agent, for example, Ronan, who would again coordinate all of that for you, make sure that all that information is provided. So that means that there'll be a very comprehensive set of drawings, a combination of site-specific drawings and all our engineering and technical drawings of the house itself, which will be used in any tender process. But all that information will be there, and you shouldn't have to worry about trying to find any of that yourself. So I know we've got quite a few questions came in, so I suppose we better move on to that. But Fraser, do you want to take it on from here?
Yeah, that's great, guys. Thank you very much for talking us through all those points, Ali and Ronan. We covered a lot of ground there, a lot of topics covered, very informative. So thanks for that. We'll run through some of the questions. We've had some really good questions that have come in. So I'll pose them both to yourself, both to Alasdair and Ronan. And we'll just summarise how you move forward, booking a consultation, and really next steps. So first question, on average, what percentage of the total cost does it take to finish the building after it's weatherproof? So in terms of costs, Ali, do you want to give a bit of guidance on what we advise on getting QS costings?
Yeah, well, what we recommend, and this is very important, especially if you're building in rural areas, is that once site information is known, for example, the length of the road, where the house is going to be sited, ground investigation, that means how deep your foundations are going to be. So if you're building a very deep peat or very hard rock, that can have a huge impact on cost. You know, your electricity connection, your water connection, again, that can have a big impact. So once you know that site information, which is quite early on, we recommend that a quantity surveyor, a QS, effectively does a revision of our estimated costs for that particular site. If you're building on a remote island, like a remote Scottish island, you could be looking at costs being 30, 40, 80% more expensive, because you've got something called prelims, which is that's the overhead cost for the contractor to run a job on a particular site. So even though we give prices on our website of the estimated total construction cost, that's based on a straightforward site. As soon as you get a site which is more difficult, then those prices can change. Likewise, if you're in a part of the country where the local contractors have to charge a lot more because of scarcity, as Ronan pointed out earlier, that can push the prices up. So getting that done at an early stage is essential in order to minimise risk, because what you don't want to do, which quite a few of our clients have done, is they've got houses designed by architects and they don't know how much it's going to cost until the tender prices come back. And I think the worst we got was someone who came to us where the tender price came back 4 times over what the architect had estimated. So yeah, that's important to do.
Yeah. So you can see on our website we've got estimate of costs for each design, but that is based on a Scottish site. It'll give you very rough guidance, but as Ali says, you need that site specific costing. So we recommend getting that done early stages, around about pre-planning stage. But you'll be able to get a lot of information from our drawings and from all the site surveys. Say if Ronan's involved, getting all the site information, that will give you a lot of information to go to a quantity surveyor with.
Yeah,
so
and
next
that's
question.
something we can. Sorry, Fraser. That's something that we could help people with. You know, and we have quantity surveyors that can do budget costs. You know, and it's a small cost, and it's probably money very well spent at an early stage.
Don't rely on a square meter rate, because what's under the ground and the location has a big impact on cost. So if someone tells you it's going to cost a certain amount per square meter, be very wary, because you might get into trouble.
Yeah. Okay, next question. What heating hot water system do you recommend if using a HebHome structure as an additional volume to a cottage refurbishment? So generally our standard in Scotland is a air source heat pump or ground source, but generally air source heat pump with underfloor heating, with mechanical ventilation with heat recovery. And you have a hot water cylinder. And quite often people do put solar panels, just PV panels on the house. Ronan, I believe it's quite similar to you guys.
Yeah, pretty much. I wouldn't really change anything from that. You know, we do sometimes in smaller houses in Dublin, if we're doing, you know, refurbs, etc., we'd still recommend a high efficiency gas combi boiler as the most appropriate method, you know, but certainly in rural dwellings, you're not going to be on a gas pipeline anyway. So yeah, I think heat pump, as you suggested, is the most appropriate.
Yeah. And I think with heat pumps, you do need to have a very well insulated structure. So it works very well with a new build because we can guarantee really high levels of insulation and air tightness. Because air source heat pumps, for example, work at a much lower operating temperature. So if you do have a very uninsulated building, it can be expensive to run. So, for example, Brian's talking about his cottage refurbishment. You'd want to make sure that that cottage is brought up to modern standards with good insulation and good levels of air tightness, because otherwise it could end up being quite expensive to run. Okay, next one. What is CPS exactly, and how does it differ from SIP? Are there any options for natural materials in the SIP CPS construction? Ali, do you want to just briefly run through the difference between SIP and CPS?
Yeah, well, the SIP, that's got a PIR, so polystyrene core between OSB, and the great benefit of that is that you've got continual insulation. So the insulation is the structure in effect. So that means that you've got very little cold bridging. It's incredibly warm. It's very, very airtight. It's very efficient. You can't change the insulation core within that. That's what it comes as. With the CPS, the closed panel system, in order to make it closed panel, that insulation is fitted in the factory now. And that's got both pass NHBC approval, and it uses a recycled hydrophobic glass wool. And it's very important that it's hydrophobic because the risk of having closed panel is water ingression and that water not being able to escape. So that means that we can't substitute that insulation for anything else. So if you use something like wood fibre or mineral wool, and that gets wet and then it gets closed, you've got a major problem. So that's why we can't change those insulation types. I mean, there is always the option of having an open panel timber frame that we don't do, but an open panel timber frame, then you fit the insulation you like. But the problem is you have to make that very, very deep timber frame in order to get the U values that you want to achieve. And there is always the risk of getting it wet on site, someone closing it, and then you're having a dampness problem. So we're trying to eliminate those risks, but at the same time, the hydrophobic recycled means that you're not using any oil-based insulation within the CPS system.
Yeah, I think, as Ali pointed out earlier, our SIP manufacturer is based in Athenry in Ireland, whereas CPS is imported from the UK. Okay, next question from Jerry, who we actually met at the Dublin show. Thanks for joining, Jerry. I have full planning approved for a retrofit and extend, but the costs are extremely excessive. Can those site percolation drawings be reused and be proposed for the HebHome and swapped into those drawings? I think that's a question for you, Ronan. It's a good question.
Yeah, I would say on the face of it, the answer would seem to be yes. I couldn't see why they wouldn't be. Not clear if it is proposed to do away with the retrofit and extend and look to demolish and replace with a new, or to use the HebHomes as an extension.
It is, yeah. I actually remember Jerry's project. It's to demolish the house and build a HebHome in its footprint.
Yeah, it's likely that they will be fine. I mean, the percolation area and the wastewater treatment system is all based on load, so it's based on number of people, but it's unlikely that will be any different or will be any significantly different. So I would imagine the answer to that is yes.
Yeah, I would say the same. If it's the same number of bedrooms, and if the footprint is, if it's in the same footprint as the existing house, then there's no reason why that can't be reused. There may just need to be updates to the drawings in which you could just engage with your current designer to make those changes. But you might get away with just using exactly the same design. Okay. What would be a maintenance overhead to maintain a timber-clad property in a coastal environment? So what's the maintenance schedule and any additional costs for maintaining timber cladding?
Well, I'll answer that with it. There shouldn't be any. I mean, the secret of using timber cladding is the detailing and making sure the detailing is followed. And that's, again, for someone like Ronan could come in, having an architect involved with us on site. All the fence posts you'll notice around Ireland will be made of larch, same in Scotland. So larch is a great timber to use because it's got the properties of a hardwood, but it's relatively cheap in comparison to hardwood. So if that, as long as it breathes and water is not trapped, that timber will, and it's good quality timber you've used, like it's a hardwood, you get it from a good supplier, that is going to last, a huge, decades and decades, 60, 70, 80 years. There are parts of the timber which might be slightly more exposed, for example, along the bottom of the building where water can splash up. get into the end grain, we would recommend using a horizontal strip along there. If you get vertical strip above, just protect the end grains. But say it's all about the detail. If it's detailed properly and the timber can breathe, it's not going to get damaged, and you don't have to touch it. You can just let it weather naturally silver. If you've got one which has been coloured, coloured maybe with oil, then you might find that some elevations that are exposed to prevailing wind and rain and hail might have to get re-oiled slightly more often, but it's a very simple process. But yeah, I wouldn't worry about the maintenance. Often it's a lot less maintenance than, say, a render block, which has to be painted every 2 or 3 years.
Yeah. Well, with the project we showed previously, the black oiled timber, you generally need to repaint that it really depends on the exposure of the site, but it could be 4 to 8 years that you're repainting that timber. We use quite a lot of thermally modified timber in Scotland, where they basically bake the timbers, and it bonds the atoms of the timber together, so it makes it very stable and also very durable. So thermally modified timber works very well as a cladding material. Right, let's move. We've actually got quite a few questions to get through. Is there much pushback on stoves? That's a good question, in addition to heat pumps. Ronan, what's the consensus on wood-burning stoves at the moment?
I haven't ever seen that in terms of specific pushback from planners. It wouldn't typically be a planning issue, you know.
If it was a building regulation, because I know in Scotland we did have a bit of a hiccup where we were told we couldn't put wood-burning stoves in our houses, and then they have made a U-turn and said we can put them in now.
Yeah, well, there's two different things there, I suppose, in terms of building regulations. So it no longer really you're no longer going to comply with having an open fireplace. I mean, I suppose that's been there for a while now, and that's maybe something that people confuse it. But typically, a sealed stove isn't going to be an issue for building regulation compliance, and then it's unlikely that planners would have a view on it either way. I haven't seen it anyway.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Ronan. So define weatherproof. So what is actually included in our packages? So it's out to the breather membrane on the outside of the kit with your external doors and windows in place, and your roof obviously in place. So we supply the roof lights to be installed by your follow-on contractor when we're putting the roof on. And then internally, you've got all the stud work for the internal load-bearing and non-load-bearing walls, and the mid-floor as well. So you'll find more information on that through the website. If you go to our Supply and Erect service, it breaks down exactly what's included in our kit. Okay, to what point are the panel finished in terms of the fit out for services internally? Just thinking about subcontractors coming in.
Well, Fraser, if I'll just explain the difference between the CPS and the SIP. So with the SIP, we put there's an internal membrane, a VC foil, and we put that behind all the junctions, for example, where the walls and also where the floor meet the outer walls. So and we don't finish the VC foil because it needs to be inspected by the follow-on contractor to make sure it's all been fitted properly. So with the CPS, we're fitting the internal service battens in the factory, which means it's a stage further on. With the CPS, we don't need to fit an internal membrane. We just need to have a foil back plasterboard. So in that respect, you're slightly further on than you are with the SIP, but both of them are almost just about ready for first fix electrics, first fix plumbing.
Yep. Okay. This is a good one. If I'm old school and don't want a heat pump, heat recovery, etc., I just want a stove, fresh air through my windows, and minimal heating. Well, it's more of a building regulations question. One for Ronan.
Not in Scotland, but
no. Yeah, I don't think you're not going to be like a new build house. You need to do a deep calculation, which is the calculation is basically for your energy usage, and it has to reach a certain level, and basically you're going to get to an A2 rating just to comply with the minimal basic of building regulations. And I don't think you're going to do that with the as described there. So I think it's not so much a planning issue, but it is a building regulation compliance issue.
Yeah,
and even if you could, no one would want to buy your house.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to. I think people do have a fear that with the airtight homes and all that you're going to have this scenario where you can't breathe or you're gasping for air, and I think that's more common in houses that are being poorly insulated and poorly sort of draft proofed, and maybe all of your ventilation closed up and then radiators pumping heat out and you can't catch your breath in them. I think a modern, contemporary, well designed and well executed house with air tightness and controlled ventilation is going to be a very comfortable environment. That would be my view, and I presume you guys will agree, so.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, we've got 2 more questions. Which banks lend against HebHomes? What kind of self-build mortgages are on offer? So this is something we've had a bit of advice from our SIP partner in Athenry. So it's something, Alasdair, we could probably put up a list of lenders that we understand you could go and speak to for self-build mortgages.
Well, there is information on our website under guidance about the lenders that do lend on self-built houses. As was mentioned previously, there might be a wee bit of pushback from the CPS because it's been imported, but we'll get that updated and make sure that that's resolved. But certainly, what we found with the SIP is that when people talk to lenders and they get pushback, it's just because they've spoken to the wrong person within the company. But there is a list of all the companies that lend on self-build, and if you do run into any pushback at all, just get in touch and you'll get it resolved for you.
Great. Final questions. Solar panels, are they an option? Are they included in building a HebHome? I'd like to be as off-grid as possible. So solar panels aren't included in the kit, but we can certainly show them on our drawings. So if you want to add PVs, you'll work with your project manager at HebHomes to show how many you want to put on the kit. So not an issue to show that.
I think, Fraser, it's quite important with either the PV or the solar that we know about it to begin with for 2 reasons. If you do want it, well, one is you don't want just to plonk it on the roof and it to look ugly. You want it to be to look as if it's been designed in. And sometimes it makes sense to not have it on the roof, to put it on the garage roof, just keep the roof nice and clean. And secondly, there could be an issue with the engineers. The engineers need to know if there's going to be a very large, heavy solar. But the PV, it's not so important, but the solar panels that are a bit heavier, it's important that we get them designed in, the engineer knows about it, and it looks good as well.
Yeah.
So let's get it in the planning stage.
And final question, where are those mountains in that current picture? That's a house in Elgol that we did, and that's looking back towards the Coolin Ridge. I don't know which exact mountain that is, but it is an incredible backdrop, and you get amazing sunsets out of this. Is our WH202, and you get incredible sunsets out that gable window in the extension there. So it's quite a spectacular sight. And I think that's it. I think we should wrap up there, guys. Thank you very much for talking us through building in Ireland, Ali and Ronan. If you want to come and chat to us about your build, then please do get in touch. You can speak to Ronan about your site specifics and pre-apps with planning, and you can come and speak to ourselves at HebHomes about your design and which one you want to take forward. If you move over to the next slide, Ali, it's got some contact details. So you can speak to, if you email Lindsay at HebHomes, she can get a consultation arranged with one of us at HebHomes, and you can get in touch with Ronan there as well about your project. We've got lots of resources on the website, so you can sign up as a member there. You may already be a member, but you'll be able to access lots of different guides and floor plans to get started on your journey. But yeah, please do get in touch if you're thinking about HebHomes for your build. And thank you all very much for joining today. And hopefully see you at the next webinar, which will probably be in March time. We'll send out more information about it near the time. But yeah, thank you everyone. Thanks, Ali and Ronan, and we'll see you all soon.
Thanks, Fraser.
See you later, guys.